When you hear the words Middle Ages, what pops into your head? Probably knights, castles, maybe that whole Dark Ages thing, right? Well, today, we're going to flip that script and look east. We're about to dive into a medieval Asia that was surprisingly connected, a world totally remade by the nonstop flow of goods, ideas, and faith.
Yeah, let's just get one thing straight right off the bat. This idea of a stagnant, isolated Dark Age, it just doesn't hold up, especially when you look at Asia. This period was actually buzzing with incredible, new connections that stretched across entire continents. And these connections didn't just move stuff around, they fundamentally reshaped societies in ways we can still feel today.
So how did this all happen? Well, it all comes down to what you could call the arteries of exchange, these massive networks that were pumping life, commerce, and culture across thousands and thousands of miles.
Okay, so two huge engines were driving this new era. On land, you had the legendary Silk Roads, which weren't really one road, but this sprawling web of routes. And by sea, you had the just as important Indian Ocean networks. Put them together, and they didn't just connect a few cities. They were forging what we can honestly call a globally connected medieval world.
But you know, these networks weren't just lines on a map. No way. They were made up of real, actual places where people would meet, trade, and crash for the night. So let's zoom in on a piece of infrastructure that was absolutely crucial to making it all work.
Say hello to the caravanserai. You can kind of think of it as the medieval version of a highway rest stop, but honestly, it was so much more than that. These were these vital outposts, often paid for by the government or some rich benefactor, and they provided a safe place to stay on the long, often dangerous journey along the Silk Roads.
And these places had a really important dual purpose. On the one hand, yeah, it was like a little fortress, a secure spot to rest and protect your valuable cargo. But on the other hand, it was a super dynamic hub of exchange. This was a marketplace not just for silk and spices, but for news, for traditions, for beliefs. It was in spots just like this that an idea like Islam began its incredible journey eastward.
And the spread of Islam is a perfect example of how these networks could transmit these really powerful ideas that would go on to totally remake entire civilizations.
So this timeline shows two really different stories. Islam got to China pretty early on, traveling peacefully with merchants and diplomats along the Silk Roads during the Tang Dynasty. But its arrival in India, a totally different vibe. It came in the 8th century with Turkic and Arab invaders through the famous Khyber Pass, and this eventually led to the creation of the powerful Delhi Sultanate, a center of Islamic rule that would last for more than 300 years.
Right, so here's the key thing. These new faiths didn't just arrive and set up shop. They interacted with and profoundly changed the societies they ran into. So let's take a look at the lasting impact these connections had on both India and China.
In India, what happened was fascinating. The new Muslim rulers up north, especially in the Delhi Sultanate, they didn't force everyone to convert. And this actually ended up strengthening India's natural diversity. The result was a northern region heavily influenced by Islam, while the south, with its own powerful kingdoms, stayed a real stronghold of Hindu culture and belief.
And that Hindu tradition in the south was built around this really profound cycle. It all starts with dharma. That's your sacred duty based on your position in the caste system, or varna. If you fulfill your duty, you build up good karma. And that's super important because of samsara, the cycle of reincarnation. The idea is to collect enough good karma so you can be reborn into a higher caste in your next life, with the ultimate goal being moksha, a final release from the whole cycle. This belief system was the absolute bedrock of their society.
So, while Islam was reshaping India, those same trade routes were carrying another powerful faith east, Buddhism. And when it got to China during the Tang Dynasty, it didn't just survive, it absolutely flourished, becoming a huge religious and cultural force.
But Buddhism wasn't just one thing. Two major schools got incredibly popular. On one side, you had Pure Land Buddhism. This was for everybody. It focused on popular devotion to a savior figure, the Amida Buddha. But on the other side, you had Chan Buddhism, which you might know by its Japanese name, Zen. This was way more strict and monastic. It rejected the idea of a savior and instead focused on intense meditation and discipline to achieve enlightenment all on your own. But as we've seen again and again throughout history, this kind of cultural exchange isn't always a smooth ride. When a new idea gets too popular, it can start to look like a threat to the old guard. And that is exactly what happened in China.
This quote really gets to the heart of the problem. As Buddhism got more and more popular, its huge tax-exempt monasteries started accumulating enormous wealth and land. So this wasn't just a spiritual issue, it was an economic one that was draining the state's bank account.
The traditional Confucian and Taoist elites in the court started to push back hard, framing this incredibly popular faith as a foreign, alien influence that was corrupting not just Chinese values, but the empire's whole power structure. All this tension finally just boiled over in the mid-9th century under Emperor Wuzong. And what came next wasn't just a political debate, it was a brutal, state-sponsored crackdown. We call it the Great Persecution of Buddhism. The scale of it was just staggering.
First, the state went after the buildings. Across the entire empire, something like 40,000 temples and shrines were completely destroyed.
Then they went after the institutions. They forcibly shut down over 4,600 monasteries and seized all their land and wealth for the imperial treasury.
And finally, there was the human cost. Over 250,000 monks and nuns were stripped of their robes and forced back into civilian life, becoming regular old taxpayers again. It was a devastating blow, designed to completely wipe out Buddhism's influence on the empire.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, first, the medieval world, especially in Asia, was way more connected than that old Dark Ages myth would have you believe. Second, these connections were incredibly powerful. They literally reshaped entire civilizations. And finally, and this is maybe the most important part, this very connection was a double-edged sword. It created both incredible cultural diversity and sometimes terribly violent conflict.
Which kind of leaves us with one last question. Today, we're more connected than ever before, right? Through our own digital Silk Roads that cross the globe in a split second. But when you see ideas and cultures clashing online and in the real world, you have to wonder, are the basic forces of connection, creation, and conflict really all that different from the world of the caravanserai? It's something to think about.